So I asked you guys for topics on my story, popular knee health advice, and you guys delivered. Thoughts on taking BPC 157 for healing knee pain. Stretching, man, I've talked about this one a lot. Is full range of motion training underrated or overrated for knee health? Ooh, this one could get me going. I'm gonna have to take some deep breaths on this one.
You're listening to the PJF Podcast, a show dedicated to decoding elite sports performance and fitness. I'm Paul Fabritz, and I'm an MBA strength and conditioning and performance trainer. If you want to become superhuman, take your fitness, and take your sports performance to the next level, this is the podcast for you. Let's do it.
NBA stars are on this program, little kids are on this program, and they're all getting insane results with their athleticism, their strength, their overall health, their skill, and their basketball IQ. If you're a hooper and you have not joined the Unranked Academy, this is your chance right now. For a limited time, I got 2 offers for you. You could sign up for your first month right now for 50% off. This is less than $1 a day. You get access to the entire Unranked database. You can use discount code TAKE50 at checkout at pjfperformance.com. Or if you're ready to lock in with me for the entire year and you're really committed to taking your game to the next level, you can sign up for our yearly subscription and take 20% off the entire year. That's going to be discount code yearly20 at checkout. Unranked is a year-round strength and conditioning program, and we break it up into off-season, pre-season, in season. It's been working miracles when it comes to vertical jump. Some kids have jumped up to 10 inches higher. Of course, everybody's different, so everybody gets different gains, but we've seen gains up to 10 inches while getting stronger. The full skill code program is in there, so we have progressive levels. That's why NBA stars are on it and little kids are on it. You could literally have only played for a couple years and still benefit from this program. And then we have the IQ Vault as well. That's where NBA coach Cody Toppert breaks down the game. And the IQ, I mean, even every time he drops a video, I learn from it. And he's dropping several videos every single month to the Hoop IQ Vault. So we literally have everything that you would ever need as an athlete, from the skill to the strength to the athleticism to the IQ side. Plus, we have video meetings where you can come on a call with me, ask me questions. We do these group meetings where everybody has an opportunity to come on, ask me their questions. And it's just an awesome environment where we're all growing together and getting to the next level. What's up, my squids? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. We're getting straight into it. No small talk today. We don't got the time for it. We're talking about knee health, underrated versus overrated. Now, before we get into it, when I say overrated, I don't mean pointless. It might still be good. It's just based on where we're at in the year 2024. Things might be still slightly beneficial, but overrated because of how social media treats it. And that's actually an issue, because if you think that something is the greatest thing of all time, but really it doesn't make a huge difference, a lot of times you start relying on that and you get rid of the good meat and potatoes. I see this all the time. And so now you're wondering why this new fancy trick is not fixing your knee pain. Well, it's because it got overhyped and you believed the hype. All right. So figuring out how beneficial things are and properly ranking them is actually very important. So I asked you guys for topics on my story, popular knee health advice, and you guys delivered. So first, I'm going to go with the most popular request. First one is Tibialis Raises, the classic tib raise. Okay, so highly overrated, not pointless, but highly overrated because of all the strong claims over like the last 5 years. And by the way, I think it's kind of leveling out now that people have tried it for 2 to 5 years and they're like, hey, this hasn't done anything for me. So I think that it is leveling out, and that now there's a lot of smart coaches that are breaking down why it's not the best exercise of all time, like some people say. I've been saying this from the start. I've always said it could be beneficial. And shoot, my YouTube videos on ankle health 15 years ago included some like band tib raises, because it's a muscle that does matter. Now it is built into training already. So anytime you're decelerating, even just lunging forward, when you're doing a single leg hop, anything that involves stabilization of the foot, it's an inverter of the foot. So a lot of times it is already being overloaded just through natural movement. But it became really popular to like lean up against a wall and do tib raises. And at first I was like, yeah, okay, sure. It's a muscle to train, and then it's like, do we have time, right? Most people might not have time if they're doing all the good meat and potato stuff, but there's some people who are just chilling at home watching TV and they're like, I'm bored, I want to do something. And so they do some tib raises. That's where I was like, okay, this is cool. And then it just came up on my Explore page and probably yours too. Every video was like, tib raise is the most important exercise ever. It improves vertical jump. No. It heals knee pain because of blood flow. No. And it's the most important thing that you could do for deceleration, like in your jumping. No. So studies show that it's handling like 1 times your body weight in jumping, whereas the soleus will be like 5, 6, 7 times your body weight. So if you're going to obsess over a lower leg muscle, gastroc and soleus, calf muscles. And then I would rank any other plantar flexor higher. So peroneals are a plantar flexor. So that's the outside shin muscle. Also the muscle that when you're going to change directions laterally, you need that to be really, really strong. So when it comes to ankle rolls, this muscle needs to be strong. If I was a betting man 10 years ago and you said, there's a lower leg muscle that is going to go viral on social media, I would have put money on soleus and then gastroc and then peroneals. I would have said peroneals might go viral at some point. And who knows, maybe somebody will listen to this and take off with it. The peroneals are so important. Then my fourth bet probably would have been the post tib. The post tib is really important and it's a plantar flexor. So it actually does decelerate triple flexion. And then number 5, maybe I would have gone with like a FHL, right? That big toe muscle is really important. It crosses the ankle. And then maybe like top 6, I would have put the anterior tib. So yeah, it's a muscle. It matters. I don't know why it gets as much attention as it does, but I actually did figure out why it gets so much attention, because I'm all about, okay, you're doing this. Let me understand the mechanism. And so I started seeing these posts and started reading the captions, and the mechanisms were 1, it's right below the knee, therefore it leads to better blood flow in the knee. So maybe people with patella tendon problems who need more blood flow, you pump that tib and it's going to rush blood flow into the area. Not true. The tib does not cross the knee joint, so it's probably not going to help with blood flow. Also, if you look at like Jake Tura's stuff, he talks about a tendon that is hurt is already getting a lot of blood flow. If it's injured, it's going to be getting the optimal amount of blood flow already in most cases. So the idea that you need to like drive more blood flow to the area might not actually be true in the first place. But yeah, so mechanism number 1, I think that one flops. And then mechanism number 2, I read somebody say, we're all focused on triple extension, which is the glutes and the quads and the calves. But what about triple flexion when you're going down into the jump? That is going to be hip flexors and hamstrings and tibialis. And that's where the red flag came up for me, because, and I got this question wrong on one of my college exams, so I understand how this mix-up happens. But when they say these muscles are decelerating triple flexion, that's not true. The triple extensor muscles are the ones that actually decelerate flexion. So when I'm going down into a jump, it's actually still glutes, quads, proximal hamstring, like the hamstrings that help extend the hip, maybe some adductor magnus is a big hip extensor, and then soleus, gastroc, post tib, peroneal, so the plantar flexors. That's what actually decelerates you, and then that's also what accelerates you. So, thinking that the hip flexors are the ones that are decelerating you because they're involved in hip flexion, and the tib the anterior tibialis decelerating you because it's involved in dorsiflexion, that's actually backwards. And I specifically remember getting this question wrong on a college exam when I first started studying this stuff. The question was, if the biceps concentrically flex the elbow, then what decelerates elbow extension when you're lowering the weight? And I was like, oh, I got this. You're going into extension, so it must be the triceps. No, the biceps are still what is decelerating that flexion. So I could see where that mix-up comes from, but that's why when it comes to deceleration, it's still the triple extensors that you want to go after. Now, the ant tib could be decelerating the foot a little bit. So like if you're in a single leg jump and you get that heel strike to keep you from just slapping down, that ant tib has to be strong enough to like kind of isometrically keep its angle so that you can roll instead of slap. However, we're talking about very, very beginner. We're talking about cases of rehab. We're talking about neurological issues where they don't have that control. Any like decent athlete who's just been active, who's been walking and running and jumping and cutting for a couple years, you're not going to have that problem of like slapping the floor. So that's not a legit concern for most people. But there are special cases where somebody's ant tib is that weak to where you would be slapping the floor and you can't decelerate the foot. But it's not decelerating the entire body weight. It's actually the opposite side of the joint that is going to be decelerating the entire body weight. So just the mechanisms that I was working off aren't true in general. And then I like to just go to real life. You know, I did more tib raises and tried them, and I didn't like it, and it got me sore. So it actually interfered with the amount of jumping that I could do, which then I think overall decreased the strength of the tibs because I wasn't training them the way that they actually need to perform in real life. And I talked to some other friends who were doing them, and I'm like, you know, everybody's hyped on it because it's something new. And then as time went on, 6 months goes by, a year goes by. Hey, how are you doing with those tib raises? I don't do them anymore because they weren't doing anything for me. Now, placebo is a heck of a drug. So if you see one of these videos and you truly believe it, don't let me get in the way of that. I hope you're not repeating it and posting about it and telling other people that this is the key to life. But you know, if you believe it, great. Because there's going to be people even in this comments, oh, it changed my life. I had cancer. It healed it. It's just completely transformed every aspect of my life. I was on my deathbed getting ready to die. I did 2 tib raises and now I'm back and now I'm in the NBA. Like that, those stories are going to come like anytime you talk about this stuff. But in the real world, when I actually talk to people, they're like, yeah, it didn't do anything for me. So again, not bad, not good, but highly overrated just because of the narratives on social media. And then the last thing that I'll say about this topic is there's over 10 muscles that start in the lower leg and cross through the ankle and act at the foot. The tib is, the anterior tib is one of those 10. And then there's even more intrinsic foot muscles. I think there's 29 or 30 muscles acting at the foot, and probably even more that we don't even fully understand and haven't identified. How are you equally training the other 29 muscles? And let's just say the muscles that cross the ankle. So how are you equally training the other 10? Because you're isolating the tibs several days a week. How are you isolating the other 9? And if you have an answer for that, do you have a life outside of this stuff? Like, how do you have the time to isolate all of those muscles? I think it would be impossible. And so how are you determining that the tib is that much more important than all of these other muscles? And if you are building anterior tibialis strength, blindly with no like assessment. Nobody said, hey, you have this specific deficiency, so you need to isolate this to bring it up to speed, and you're just blindly getting it stronger. How do you know that you're not getting that way stronger than all the other muscles? Because you're not paying attention to those. So when you look at it like that, you start to realize that, hey, regular good training, especially plyometrics, agility, playing sports, going on a hike on an uneven surface like our ancestors did. This is how they built all of these muscles equally, where I'm having to supinate and I'm having to pronate, I'm having to dorsiflex and I'm having to plantar flex. That trains all of them in the right ratios. And so we don't develop any imbalances. And we train all of them. It's built into movement already. So then on top of that, if we're going to isolate something, I think you would need to get a assessment where somebody's tests it and they're like, hey, your anterior tibialis is way weaker than all these other muscles. You should do these specific exercises to bring it up to speed. But to blindly just start doing it, I'm not as convinced that that's a great idea unless you do have the time to isolate the other 9 muscles equally. And by the way, I already know that some of the comments are going to say, yeah, but if you're already doing plantar flexion, you're doing calf raises, then it's going to be imbalanced. Your calves are going to be too strong for your anterior tibialis. And my answer to that is it's supposed to be. Like I said, 5, 6, 7 times your body weight in sprinting and jumping. And I didn't look up those exact stats. It depends on your level and what task you're doing, but it's way, way, way higher. And so it's supposed to be way stronger. You ever notice that you could calf raise a lot of weight and you can't anterior tib raise a lot of weight? There's a reason. The body is supposed to be imbalanced. You're supposed to be really strong in certain areas, and then other areas we're not quite as strong. So that idea that, well, the calves are getting too strong for the ant tib, it's supposed to be like that. Again, train the ant tib, that's fine. It's built into movement, so I don't isolate it, but you certainly can if you want to and you have the time. Just don't hype it up like it's some miracle muscle. All right, the next one, thoughts on taking BPC 157 for healing knee pain. So that is a peptide that's been around for a while, but it's getting more popular on social media. Is it underrated? Is it overrated? That's really hard for me to say because we don't have studies on it, like very good long-term studies. I would say it's properly rated. I have friends who have had like Achilles tendinopathy, or one guy who had a rupture and then he just always had some tendinopathy and never really healed. He injected directly and he said it was better within a week. And you hear these stories quite a bit. I've also heard stories where people inject it directly into the site and it did nothing. So it's he said, she said. I have tried it orally for 30 days. My experience, so first of all, let me tell you why I took it. I took it because I was actually dealing with some patellofemoral pain in the knees, both knees. I was an idiot and I didn't listen to my own advice, and I ramped up my on-court stuff really fast. So in the last podcast, I talked about how I played in the 76ers practice that one time, and I did pretty good. And after that, I was like, I'm a basketball player, I'm back. And then like every other day I went super hard playing ones, like I was 20 again, with no ramp up to this point. And then all of a sudden my knee started aching like I was old. And I've never felt a knee ache. Now, I've been jumping intensely for 30 straight years, playing basketball for 30 years. So of course I've had the patella tendinopathy, the jumper's knee flare-ups here and there, but I got that down to a science. I know how to handle that. I know what kind of workload spikes are going to cause that, but I've never had like achy knees. It was a weird thing. At first I was like, do I have arthritis? Am I getting old? And no, it turns out it is patellofemoral pain syndrome, which is actually probably even more common than jumper's knee. We talk about jumper's knee a lot just because the kids, 13 to like 25 struggle from that. Outside of that, like after that age, patellofemoral pain syndrome is actually more popular. And you've probably heard of it called runner's knee. So a lot of people from jogging long distances will get this pain. and it's pain in the front of the knee. Sometimes people confuse it for patellar tendinopathy, but it's a very different injury, and it's healed entirely different, right? The mid-range isometrics don't quite work as well. And if you want me to do a whole podcast on how I actually healed my patellofemoral pain syndrome, I could do that. I don't want to take away from this podcast. But anyways, I was struggling with that. And it kind of was defeating me for like a straight month and a half. And I've never been defeated by a knee injury. Like I said, I've been doing all this intense stuff for so long, and I've never had a surgery, a lower body surgery, never had a knee injury. All I've had is little patella tendon flare-ups. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And so I couldn't heal it. So I started doing research on peptides. Came across BPC 157, which you guys have been asking me about for several years, but I've never really taken. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be getting questions about this for the next several decades. I should probably have a little bit of experience with it. So I actually asked one of my physical therapy friends, who's probably one of the best physical therapists of all time in the NBA, has rehabbed some of the best, some of the biggest injuries in the NBA. And I talked to him about it, and he was like, I can't recommend anything. There's no studies. It's he said, she said. But he said, I would not inject it. I would not inject, especially in cartilage or tendon. He said that he's been hearing that a lot of people are injecting things in tendon, whether that's BPC, whether that's PRP. And he's saying that it could build up scar tissue in the tendon. It is an injury in itself to the tendon, just the needle going in. And so that's why he actually doesn't recommend PRP at all, which the research isn't great on PRP, but he said that can actually cause long-term issues, injecting directly into the tendon. So he's like, yeah, whatever you do, just don't, if you take it, don't inject it directly. And so I did it for 30 days, very expensive. It was like several $100s, because you could, people get it online, but it's sketchy. You don't know where it's coming from. It's not regulated. So I actually went to a clinic close by where I trusted them, and they had a better source. And I took it. I took it every night, just one pill. What did I notice? It didn't really heal my knee pain. It wasn't magic, but like I said, it's kind of like ibuprofen on steroids. It really does decrease inflammation. And so every morning when I would wake up, like after a hard workout in my mid-30s, if I worked really hard the day before, I'm going to have some kind of foot soreness and just some stiffness as I'm going down the stairs in the morning. And that was gone. I felt really good early on. Maybe it increased my day-to-day recovery a little bit, but it's also hard to say because placebo is a heck of a drug, like I said earlier. So I'm looking for results. And so sometimes you could have just given me a sugar pill, and I probably would have thought the same thing. Overall, I don't think that it did much for me, but I do think that it improved the inflammation. And I would not take it again because the benefit for me was minor and the risk is potentially high because we don't have long-term studies. So, anytime you're messing with stuff like that, we don't know if there's some issues related to increasing risk of cancer, and we just don't know. Anytime you're playing with the human body, you F around, you find out. My general rule is like, I'm not going to take anything that's not been studied long term. And so I think for me, it was a little bit overrated. Again, I've seen some incredible cases, like my friend who did the Achilles injection directly. He had great results. So overall, I really can't give my opinion. I would lean towards overrated off my personal experience, but we don't know. So overall, I'm going to say properly rated as of now. Okay, next one. Ooh, this one could get me going. I'm going to have to take some deep breaths on this one. Ooh, keep it professional. Keep it professional. Importance of avoiding heel strike on the court. I got to keep it professional here. So I see this all the time on social media. First, let me give my answer. Extremely overrated. All of a sudden, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, I started seeing this on social media, people saying that like all these injuries happen from a heel strike. And they'll show like somebody tearing their Achilles and like the heel drops to the ground. And yeah, that's when the foot is back behind the hip. Like you wouldn't want a heel strike when the foot is behind the hip. Now, when the foot is under the hip, things change. When the foot is in front of the hip, you're almost always going to get a heel strike, or at least a full foot landing. So there's a difference. Like Sydney McLaughlin runs with a full foot landing. Her heel is on the ground compared to other runners that are more on the forefoot. There's some of the best endurance runners of all time that the heel does hit the ground. Now, in sports, like in an approach jump, there's always a heel strike. And we're talking about the heel landing first and then rolling to midfoot and then rolling to the ball of the foot. Deceleration, right? Anything that involves deceleration where the foot is out in front of the body. So this happens on a approach 2-foot jump. This definitely happens on an approach 1-foot jump even more. And then if I'm running full speed and I go to decelerate, that heel is always going to hit first. This is 100% natural. There's never, ever, ever in life been a good athlete who avoids a heel strike. You can't find me examples of any of them. Michael Jordan jumped with a heel strike. LeBron James jumps with a heel strike. Deion Sanders decelerated with a heel strike. Like every single good athlete ever, you couldn't. It's actually, if you tried to avoid a heel strike, you wouldn't be able to. And if you did try, it would actually not only decrease performance, it would make it more dangerous because you just took out a natural break and now you're landing just on your forefoot, like smaller surface area now has to handle 8 times body weight. And so that's how like people really roll their ankle is not having a good full foot contact, trying to change directions just on the ball of the foot instead of having that full foot down. Having the heel down helps with balance. So just go stand on one leg, your heel is going to be down and your balance. Now lift off, come to the ball of the foot, try to balance, can't do it. So any move that requires more balance, you're going to need the heel. Certain like low running speeds, like if I'm a basketball player coming off a pick and roll, I'm not trying to blow by somebody, I'm trying to make a read, you're going to see a heel strike because that heel strike buys you a longer ground contact, that buys you time, that buys you more time to make decisions. Now, where this idea comes from is people will watch sprinters, and most sprinters are always on the balls of the feet. And yes, for sure, you don't have the time to heel strike first in sprinting. If you're walking, right, normal gait, you're going to have a heel strike. At some point when it turns from a walk to a slow jog, naturally, you're probably still going to have a heel strike. And then at a certain speed, you transition over to more of a flat foot landing. And then at a certain speed, you transfer over to more of a forefoot. And then sprinting, of course, you're going to be all forefoot. So to say that it's bad is just so ridiculous, right? And then what you'll hear from there's kind of like these movement cults online that say you can never like strike your heel. A lot of times they'll be like, well, when people tear their ACL, it starts with a heel strike. How about the other billion reps that you saw before that where there was a heel strike and there was no torn ACL? So saying that is like saying, I know a friend that got severely injured in a car accident, therefore I don't drive a car anymore, right? Like, and actually because doing everything on the balls of the feet is actually more dangerous in terms of deceleration and change of direction, it's actually more like saying, my friend got hurt in a car, therefore I don't drive a car, so how do I get around? I actually bought a motorcycle. Oh, okay. You bought a motorcycle. So you just traded one thing for something else that's actually way more dangerous. And that's essentially what you're doing if you're trying to avoid a heel strike during deceleration, especially during like an approach jump. Imagine bringing that much speed and striking the foot out in front of the body and just trying to like tippy toe into that and just stay on the ball of the foot. We're talking about Jones fractures. We're talking about significantly increased ankle sprains. We're talking about way more stress on the Achilles. Man, I mean, you'd have so many more torn Achilles by trying to get off the heels in sports. So again, like if the foot is behind you, the heel normally won't be down unless you're T-stepping. So like think about a negative step. That's the situation I'm talking about. A T-step is where you actually open up and point the toe out. So my left foot is here, my right foot is pointed out this way. That is the foot back behind the body, but it's actually not, because you're opening up your entire body. So it's actually more like a lateral push-off. It's the same thing as a lateral slide from like the hip and from the ankle perspective. It's just this foot stayed straight, this foot opened up. So that's one of the safer ways. Like if you're backpedaling and then you got to sprint, instead of putting all that stress on the Achilles with a negative step, you would want to T-step, open up, and then push out of that. Now, you can't always T-step, and that's why the negative step is essential, and we got to build durability there. So if you just caught a basketball, you can't T-step to go forward. You would negative step to go forward. And then I've heard skills trainers and these movement cults say, because KD and Kobe and anybody who's tore their Achilles, they do a negative step, you got to avoid that. Come on, bro. Nobody's avoiding the negative step. It's built into us because it's faster. It is way faster. And even if you trained it every day in practice, in the game, when you actually need speed in a competitive environment, you would do it. And then because you weren't practicing it, you don't have any durability in that position. So that's why we do these like plyometrics where I put the foot back behind the hip. Like we go to that negative, or we go to that negative step angle, and we like pulse there, and I load them with weight there, and we do hops, and then we gradually increase it, and then eventually I do full speed negative steps. You got to build durability in that specific position. Now, in that negative step, with the toe forward, the foot back behind the hip, I would not want the heel to collapse. That's when I would want a stiff ankle, and I would want to pop off the balls of the feet. Because with the foot back behind, now the length placed on the calf and the Achilles is enormous, and the peak forces are so high, that's when a tear could happen. So yeah, you want to train a stiff contact when the foot's back behind, but then they try to apply that to every ground contact. And with the foot underneath the hip, we're not at those same lengths. So the heel could be down. And with the foot out in front of the body, especially when I need to decelerate, the calf and Achilles are nowhere near the same length. And so you could handle all that peak braking force with the heel down, and it's not an injury risk. Okay, the next question is about deep range of motion training. So is full range of motion training underrated or overrated for knee health? I'm going to say properly rated. I think it's properly rated. I think some people hype it up a lot. Some people say that it's not necessary and you never need to go full range because in sports you don't go through full knee flexion. But I think from a health standpoint, it's important. I saw a post from David Gray, who's a good physical therapist, and he was talking about mid-range for tendon health and full range for joint health. So one of the unique benefits of full range, other than the increased hypertrophy, and having juicy quads does matter for knee health. It really does. So you're going to get better hypertrophy gains from full range of motion training. But if I go all the way into knee flexion, you're maintaining that range, and you're also getting, in order to go into full knee flexion, I need tibial internal rotation. And these little internal rotations, and then as I extend, I'm getting more of the external rotation. This rotation of the knee is so important for knee health. So when it comes to getting your knees feeling better, this is something we attack in the durability code a lot. We do a lot of knee rotation stuff. And if you don't go through a joint's full range of motion, you probably will lose that ability over time. And that joint starts to get more stuck. And we can no longer get into deep knee flexion and fluid knee extension without going through those joint ranges. So we do like these CARs, controlled articular rotations, in the durability code. But then the best thing that I've done for this is like a cable. You put your foot through a strap and you start tibia externally rotated, and then you come into knee flexion. So it's just a hamstring curl. But as you go into knee flexion, you're internally rotating the tibia, and you go into full knee flexion, and this strengthens the areas like medial hamstring that's involved in that internal tibial rotation. And I'm telling you, a lot of knee pain can really clear up. Not all, but certain types of knee pain can really clear up from doing these exercises. And you got to maintain that tibial internal rotation for proper movement and sprinting. The moment the tibia gets stuck in external rotation, think about the backswing. So your foot just left the ground. You're coming into knee flexion. You should see the toe is not stuck out that entire time. The toe comes forward or even in, and the heel moves away. That's tibial internal rotation. I think a lot of people get that wrong. They think that comes from foot pressure on the ground. That actually comes from the ability to internally rotate the tibia, which is why you see somebody jump and they come into knee flexion, and you'll see that the toe goes in and the heel goes away. If they're coming in knee flexion, if somebody jumps and stays in knee extension, you'll still see the toe pointed out, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But like when you're sprinting, it is important to have the tibia be able to rotate as you come into knee flexion. And I say that rant to say that I do think that like some full range of motion squatting or some full range of motion leg press, like loading even with just moderate weights, I think is really important for maintaining that ability. Because like I said, in a deep squat, in order to get down to that bottom position, there's a lot of good, healthy rotation happening. And that's not always like in squatting with your foot on the ground. The tibia is not doing a lot of movement. The femur would actually be relatively externally rotating. And so that's what I mean is just this interaction between the tibia and the femur. There's rotation, slight rotations that happen there that is very important for knee health. And it flips closed chain versus open chain, right? So open chain, it would be the tibia moving. Closed chain is probably more of the femur externally rotating. But either way, it's this relative rotation that you need to maintain. And I think deep range of motion strength training is important. Now, people hear that and they're like, okay, I got to maximally load that. I think that gets pretty dangerous. I think a lot of the muscle tears that you see where people got to go get surgery is like deep range of motion squatting as heavy as possible, or heavy RDLs going as far as they possibly can. I think it's too dangerous, and I don't think there's a huge benefit. So I think you go light or you go a moderate weight and you go for reps when we're talking about the deep full range of motion training. I think once it's time for outputs, like let's lift heavy, let's get motor unit recruitment, I like mid-range. So I'm talking about thigh parallel during squatting, or even thigh just above parallel, 100 degrees, maybe all the way up to like 90 degrees. I like loading, if I'm doing more maximal loading, I like doing it with mid-range. Now, if you have patella tendon issues, everything changes. I don't recommend going full range off the bat, because as you go into a deep knee flexion, the patella will kind of push, or the patella tendon will stretch over that patella, and it gets a lot of compressive forces. That patella bone is pushing on it, and sometimes that just keeps aggravating it, so it never heals. So jumper's knee, even like Osgood Slaughter, like I would do more mid-range isometrics, like a 60-degree knee angle isometric hold for quad tendon, maybe up to like 90 degree. That's like the deepest I would go. But that full knee flexion with load, a lot of times that just pisses it off. Now, sometimes, eventually we have to trend towards that. That's part of rehab, is just like, okay, that's going to be part of my goal, is to get all the way down there pain-free. But early on in your rehab, I don't think that you should be messing with the full range. I think it sets a lot of people back. So typically, I think you're going to get your best tendon health gains from mid-range, and then I think you're going to get your best just joint range of motion gains from doing the full range with light to moderate weight. And of course, when it comes to strength and size, you could get it from mid-range or from deep range. Typically, the studies will show that deep range is a little bit better because it places the muscle on a better stretch. And even like there's newer studies on lengthened partials that are showing just as good of hypertrophy gains, muscle size gains, compared to just normal full range of motion training. So like you can get down to the bottom, heels elevated, full knee flexion, and kind of just pulse in that bottom position. That could be really beneficial for hypertrophy of the quads, hypertrophy of the glutes, adductor magnus, etc. So overall, I would say properly rated when it comes to deep range of motion training. All right, and then the next one, stretching. Man, I've talked about this one a lot. The studies overall would suggest that you're not going to stretch your way out of knee pain. A lot of people theorize that it's actually going to cause knee pain. I don't. I don't think it's going to heal knee pain, most knee pain, and I don't think that it's going to cause knee pain. I think if you like to do it, you should do it. I still stretch. We do dynamic stretching. Most of our range of motion is going to just come from full range of motion strength training, though. I think that's a little more permanent, and the studies would suggest that that's true. But you can get some improved range of motion from static stretching. And so if it feels good and you wake up the next day and it didn't increase your pain, then I think it's a good idea to do. I just don't want people to think that that is the thing, right? If you start thinking stretching is the meat and potatoes and you don't do all the other stuff that's proven to work, like isometrics, like heavy strength training, like load management, avoiding jumping while your knee hurts, gradually introducing activity, gradual ramp ups, not increasing your workload by more than 10% per week, right? These are the things that we know work. So if you start going, well, stretching is the main thing and I don't need to pay attention to these other things, then I think your mind is in the wrong place. And I think you're going to be frustrated with your rehab. However, I do think if it feels good and the next day it doesn't increase pain, then great, go ahead and do it. Also, even though it's not super permanent, like static stretching might give you a window of opportunity. So if I go stretch my quads, I feel like I can get into knee flexion a little bit better. Therefore, when I start my squats, I might actually get a little more range of motion. And then I can strengthen that range of motion and that becomes a little more permanent. Now my nervous system can cement that range. And so it wasn't the stretching that led to the permanent change, but it gave me a window of opportunity. And now a lot of people say you can never stretch before a workout because of all the studies that show it decreases power output. Yes, this is true. It does decrease power output when you hold a stretch for a long time and you don't follow it up with a dynamic warm-up. So that's where the studies have shifted, where they do a group where that static stretches and then they go test their vertical jump and they decrease. But if you do a group that static stretches and then does a real dynamic warm-up with real movement, then it no longer decreases your vertical jump. It doesn't improve it, but it doesn't decrease it. So if it feels good and it gives you a temporary window where you could get more range of motion, then I think it makes more sense. Is it going to help improve your recovery? No, it does not improve recovery. A lot of the claims made around stretching are not true, but that made everybody throw it out. But I think there's still other mechanisms that potentially still make it beneficial. So after saying all that, is it underrated or overrated? I think 2 to 5 years ago, it was highly overrated because people were still pushing it so hard as the main thing. Now in 2024, I think so many trainers have caught on to the studies that it doesn't overall, in the studies, it doesn't decrease the risk of knee pain and doesn't heal knee pain. Now they've gone so far in the other direction that stretching is bad and you never need to stretch. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that now it's underrated. Did you hear that? Paul Fabritz said static stretching is now underrated. Now, I don't think you have to do it. I don't think it's that important. But people are saying that it's the worst thing in the world and that you'll be living your life just happy and you'll just be skipping through a meadow and you do one quad stretch for 15 seconds and you're going to you're just going to fall out and die on sight, right? That's what trainers are saying. You haven't heard? That's exactly what trainers are saying. Therefore, it's underrated because it's not that bad and it's probably not going to harm you and it could be good in a certain scenario. All right, next one, icing after every workout or icing after games. So This one is still a debate, even at the highest levels. Most NBA players are getting done with their game, putting on ice packs or getting in the ice bath. Overrated. Yeah, I don't think you need it. So could it lead to a faster recovery time? So like you have a back-to-back, I'm going to go get in an ice bath or I'm going to put an ice pack on my knees. Yeah, the studies actually do show that your perceived recovery, there are perceived benefits and that people think that they recover faster the next day. Now, these aren't actual adaptations. So when it comes to like training in the off season, we're looking for an adaptation. We're not looking for faster recovery. In training, we kind of just want to trust the body's natural processes that we've had for millions of years and continue to work really well. A process like inflammation. You just train really, really hard and you feel like your knees are a little bit inflamed right after. That's there for a reason. You think your body was wrong for that? No, like it's trying to heal it. So it's getting the healing, the nutrients to the source. We're increasing blood flow, getting nutrients to the source so that it can begin healing. If I ice it, that does decrease the inflammation and it decreases the blood flow, and it's probably going to decrease the amount of nutrients that are getting to the area. So yeah, that's probably not a great thing to do when it comes to actually making an adaptation. I broke down my cartilage and tendons or whatever, my quad muscles. I broke it down in this hard workout. I want it to rebuild. I'm letting the body do its natural thing. I'm not interfering with it personally. The guy that made the whole RICE thing, rest, ice, compression, elevation, later on in his career, he came out and said, by the way, I was wrong on the ice part. Don't ice. Same with like ibuprofen. It's giving you this temporary decrease in inflammation. There's big downsides to ibuprofen, and we don't want to decrease that initial inflammation. That's a natural amount of inflammation. So yeah, I would say overall overrated, but the studies do show perceived benefits in terms of being able to bounce back quicker, especially with ice baths. And so if you have a back-to-back, now it's not really about what's the best for adaptation. It's just, how do I feel good enough to get out there and play tomorrow? And that's very important. A kid who's in a tournament, trying to get ready or they play in the morning, they got to come back in the evening for a championship game. You just want to feel better for that game. Maybe an ice bath after the first game. Sure. I wouldn't still, but the studies do support that there are some perceived benefits and people think that they bounce back quicker. Does it lead to better adaptations and gains long-term? No. But yeah, it can make you feel fresher. Let's just say that. And then there's potentially some nervous system benefits that it could help you get into the parasympathetic, because you get in ice bath, you get this sympathetic response like, oh crap, I'm going to die. This is crazy. And then you stay in there for like 3 to 5 minutes and then you hop out and you get this bounce back from the sympathetic and you kind of bounce back into this very relaxed recovery state that we call the parasympathetic nervous system. And so, yeah, when you're in the parasympathetic nervous system, that is a good thing. However, do we get more parasympathetic? These studies are by itself. This is all you did today. You just did the ice bath. Now, in the real world, I just worked out really, really hard. I just played a game where I was insanely sympathetic already. So already, just after this game, I'm going to have a parasympathetic bounce back, right? Especially you guys have been on our programs. We do breathing right afterwards. Some good nasal breathing that bounces you back into that parasympathetic. But because I already had this high stress scenario that got me sympathetic, I think you're going to be parasympathetic afterwards anyways. And then the ice bath is just doubling down on that same mechanism. So I don't think that you'll get a big parasympathetic benefit from that ice bath. And then again, from the adaptation standpoint, we know that you build muscle better if you don't take an ice bath right after that workout. It can kill those the inflammatory signals that we actually need to start rebuilding muscle. It shuts that off. So if you are going to do it after a workout, I would actually do it later in the day. So you get your workout, you get your lift, and then later in the day, maybe 6 hours later, then you do it. Then at least you didn't kill those initial initial kind of signals that the inflammation is sending to your body in order to start to increase that repair process. So is icing underrated or overrated? I would still say overrated, because most people still do it and a lot of people still swear by it. But the mechanisms don't make sense and the science doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of people who also feel worse. When they ice their knees, they feel like their knees do not feel good. Me personally, I trend towards heat. So if I am going to do ice bath, I'm going to try to do like contrast. I do like that more for recovery than just ice. But like my knees feel better if I'm doing sauna a couple days a week. If I can get in the sauna and stretch and kind of go through a full range of motion in the sauna, get a full sweat before a workout, that actually makes me feel way better. And this has been theorized with like vets who like go to the suns later in their career and they just get rejuvenated. The theory is like you're now in warm weather day to day, you're out getting sunlight. That can be really, really good for your joints compared to being in a cold place. I think constantly being cold can kind of stiffen up your joints a bit, and maybe ice is just doubling down on that. That's how I feel personally. So I don't ice my knees ever. I rarely do ice baths unless it's going to be a contrast thing, or I'm just looking for the other benefits. Like I'm just trying to push through something today. I just want to get an ice bath and be calm and breathe so that when I get out the rest of the day, everything else feels easier. Like I think there's some huge general health benefits to doing it occasionally. But from a joint health perspective, I think it's still slightly overrated. All right, guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you need to heal your knee pain or Achilles or ankle or back pain, whatever you got, Durability Code is an unbelievable option. It has transformed thousands of lives. It is a program designed to move better, feel better, improve joint health, get your tendons really durable, get stronger full body. Now, this isn't some soft corrective exercise program. Yes, we have some awesome correctives. However, it is a full body strength training program that gets people really, really strong and really, really athletic as well. Now, it's Durability Code Restore and then Durability Code Prime. Or you could do Elite, which gives you access to both. But we always start with Restore when somebody's in pain or they're just injury prone or they've been away from training for a while. You start with Restore and that gradually ramps you up. I think it is the best gradual ramp up to get people back into athletics. I truly do. I'm not just saying that because I'm biased. It is such an incredible progression between the strength training and the plyometrics at how low of a level we start, and every single exercise has multiple regressions and progressions. So anybody can do it. I don't care if you're young, if you're old, if you're injured, if you're not injured. Durability Code Restore will gradually ramp you up and get you more and more durable every week. Then you go into Durability Code Prime, where health and movement quality is still the number one priority, but we still get you really athletic in that program and get you really strong. So Prime is going to help you handle the forces that you're going to encounter in real sports. Restore is just going to get you feeling better, moving better, so that we can get into a more intense program like Prime. All right, guys, so if you want to hop on that program, go to pjfperformance.com, click on training, and then click on our programs page, and then click Durability Code. Until next time, I'm out.